St. Louis and everything it has to offer. Jason Hall, welcome to the Big 550 KTRS.
Well, thank you for having me this morning.
First thing, media training. You need to talk right into the microphone. You can move it, get it nice and comfortable. There you go. Right. Pretend you're eating the microphone. All right. What's your title at the Regional Chamber?
I'm our Vice President for Entrepreneurship and Innovation and our General Counsel.
Okay. And the St. Louis Regional Chamber used to be called the RCGA.
That is correct.
Okay. Now, you are in charge of, well, let me start this way. You have been instrumental in T-Rex and the Cortex and sort of St. Louis becoming this tech hub. How much of that is real and how much of that is hype?
It's very real, and I am proud to be a part of the startup and innovation community, as we call ourselves. It's a great community of leaders, but it's very real. Just last year, the Wall Street Journal analyzed the data on new company creation.
Right.
And they expressed a concern that the United States isn't creating companies fast enough to remain globally competitive. Only 17 states had year-over-year growth. Number one of those 17 states was the state of Missouri. St. Louis being a tremendous anchor in that startup community. So we're creating companies at an incredible rate. The last quarter data for venture capital, which is the capital that funds tech startups, down around the United States for the first quarter, up 327% in the St. Louis region. So it is on fire right now. We're creating companies. People are coming with new ideas to this community, tackling big issues in food and medicine and technology, creating new companies, finding the support they need, and making their dreams come true.
Is it the government or is it something else that is sort of fueling this? Why is all this going on?
I think it's happening because we're actually seeing collaboration between the private and the public sectors. And I think collaboration is the pathway forward for St. Louis, and the startup community is proof positive. We've seen strong public support. Mayor Slay has been an incredible champion for startups, the county executive, the governor, and others that have stepped up to align public resources with the private sector, the venture capital firms that are growing here, like Cultivation Capital and others.
Right.
Really phenomenal effort to come together and provide the support to these startups and help them get these companies up off the ground and grow.
Jason Hall with us from the St. Louis Regional Chamber. Explain to me what's going on, because when I hear this, I see in my mind two people in a room with a computer trying to come up with an app. Is that what's going on? Making $10 an hour. I mean, what is going on in these little startup companies? Well,
it's very diverse. I mean, we've got, look at the Danforth Plant Science Center in the Creve Coeur area. We've attracted companies and startup entrepreneurs from around the world to choose St. Louis as the best place to tackle the big issues in agriculture. We're going to have to double agricultural output by 2050 to feed a growing global population. The entrepreneurs at Danforth and Bridge Park, the areas around there, they're tackling those big issues. We also have startup entrepreneurs that are creating new apps, softwares, new ways to do things. Really an exciting company, Talify, that came here from by way of London and India,
right,
to create a new app for businesses handling big processes, the big organizations. How do you handle that? Making organizations more efficient through software. Those are the kinds of big issues that they're tackling. They've landed big customers like Nestle and Emerson as they've come to St. Louis. So people are tackling big issues in St. Louis startups.
The idea isn't that hopefully one of these turns out to be the next eBay, but the rest of them all fall by the wayside. Is that the general plan, or is the goal that all of these will somehow live on for years?
No, we know in the startup community, we want to be a risk-taking culture here. And when you take risk, sometimes you fail. The question isn't, do you fail? It's what you do next. And through failure, our entrepreneurs can learn incredible lessons. And we want that talent here in St. Louis. Let them step up, create the next company, take those lessons learned forward. I mean, think of Steve Jobs at Apple, kicked out of his company at age 30. He might have considered that a failure.
Right.
And he had to come back and led us with one of the great technology companies in the world today.
If you want to be in movies, you move to Hollywood. If you want to be in country music, you go to Nashville. If you want to be in theater, you go to New York. And if you want to start a tech company, you would go to Silicon Valley. Are we challenging Silicon Valley? I mean, are these tech software guys coming to St. Louis, setting up shop and knocking on doors? I mean, where are we in this?
Absolutely. We see companies coming here from the coasts, from around the world to choose St. Louis. As I like to say, Silicon Valley meets Silicon Prairie, and it starts right here in St. Louis. The companies are, they're finding the support they need, the capital they need, the access to mentors, places to work. Quite frankly, we have some real advantages over Silicon Valley, best-in-class talent, capital, but it's more affordable here. And every dollar you're raising to get that business off the ground goes a heck of a lot further in St. Louis than Silicon Valley. We've seen some of our companies, they'll open an office in Silicon Valley if they need to, but I think we've got some real advantages here.
Jason Hall with us. What are the you talk to big companies, big and small, startup companies, you talk to major CEOs. What are some of the concerns? What are the positives and the negatives about business here in St. Louis?
Well, I think the positives, let's start there. One of the things we've heard from startup entrepreneurs, especially those that have chosen St. Louis from somewhere else to come here to pursue their dreams, they love that we have tremendous access to early stage capital. They love that they can pick up the phone and get connected. One of the things that we've heard repeatedly is it has been so impressive when we moved to St. Louis that your largest companies, the Monsantos, the Emersons, the Express Scripts of the world, they return our calls and they're asking, how can we help you be successful? And they tell us we did not get that where we came from. And so I think that sense of community here, where our large business community, our local leaders, I was, a few weeks ago, we were down at City Hall, Mayor Slay welcoming a new class of startups that had chosen St. Louis to say, come meet some of our civic partners. Let's build a community here together. And I think that sense of collaboration, let's don't underestimate that, is uniquely St. Louis. And I think it's a real competitive advantage that we have in the marketplace.
What are some of the negatives?
I think we've got challenges like others. We need to continue to have an incredibly educated and talented workforce to make sure we can fuel that pipeline of talent that's needed for these startups. I think we need to continue in the Midwest here to build more access to capital. That is critical. We cannot take, while we've come very far, we simply cannot take that for granted.
We hear that these crazy young kids, they like Uber, they like mass transit, they like living in sort of a downtown area. Yep. True or false?
Oh, I think there is certainly an attraction to density in the urban core for some of these startup entrepreneurs. But at the same time, from my perspective, I'm seeing it throughout the region. We're seeing Pier 151 in Belleville, what Randy Schilling has done in St. Charles with OPO startups. I mean, we're seeing entrepreneurs have a lot of great choices in St. Louis, but I do think it's critical that we have a strong urban core that can compete with the urban cores around the world. Mm-hmm. And that's just the reality.
How big was the decision for the mapping agency to pick the city of St. Louis?
Well, at the regional chamber, we were thrilled that a $2 billion project and 3,000 workforce are going to be in the St. Louis region. The NGA has made a decision, and they're going to be on the north side of the city of St. Louis. That positions them to be a part of an incredible growing corridor from downtown, midtown, and I think becomes a real connector and part of a thriving urban core tech community.
Jason Hall, is there a number? How many startup companies are there, or can you put a number on it, or do we have any idea?
Oh, certainly we can analyze, business census data.
I mean, is it 10 or is it 500 or is it 100 or?
We're talking thousands of startup companies.
Here in St. Louis?
Absolutely. I mean, at one point I used to be able to, when I first got involved in this space in 2009, you could sort of identify pretty quickly the few kind of hot tech startups, and every day we're seeing more. More are choosing St. Louis. I mean, look at just downtown T-Rex. I mean, you're home to hundreds of companies in that one co-working facility.
Hundreds of companies in that T-Rex building?
Absolutely.
How about Cortex? How many companies are in there?
Oh, I don't have the precise number, but order of magnitude, you're talking hundreds of companies there as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
So Square decided to come in. They got some tax incentives to come in. Are companies going to live off of Square because Square is here? In other words, there are companies that live off of Boeing that make the parts for the planes.
Absolutely.
Are there going to be companies living off of Square and some of these other companies?
Well, I think the reality is having larger startups that have done well, like Square here, there is a ripple effect to their spend. They need janitorial services. They need talent agencies. They need ad agencies. So the reality is, the more businesses you have of scale like that, there's a bigger spend, and that in turn creates more jobs. We call those indirect jobs in the economic development profession.
All right. So if you've got thousands of startups, how many jobs? And we're not going to hold you to this, but roughly ballpark, how many jobs are equated to the startup community here in the region?
Oh my goodness, that would be a very difficult number for me to pull up, but it is a big number. I mean, when you just look at the Federal Reserve came out with some revisions to the economic growth numbers in the St. Louis region, and one of the reasons for the revision, they said, was underestimating the impact that the tech startup sector was having in the St. Louis economy because it was creating jobs at a faster rate. So, it is becoming a major force in the St. Louis economy.
Say that stat for me again. The Wall Street Journal had this is of all the markets, this is the number one startup market.
The state of Missouri was the number one state for year-over-year growth in new business creation, new startup companies. Number one by the Wall Street Journal.
Well, we know this doesn't happen overnight, so let's go back to Governor Nixon's first term. Who was in charge of startups and entrepreneurs and bringing those types of businesses to the state for those 4 years?
Well, in 2009, I joined Governor Nixon's administration and became his person on point for startups. And at the time, the state of Missouri was ranked 49th out of the 50 states for startup activity by the Kauffman Foundation. And we started a process with the governor of saying, we're at the height of a global recession. We are going to focus on the economy and putting Missourians back to work, and startups are going to be a part of that policy. And we created and sort of recreated an organization called the Missouri Technology Corporation, which is the state-level entity that supports entrepreneurs. And we literally created that policy.
So what you're saying is before you got there, they were 49th. Now, after you were there 4.5 years, now you do the similar thing for the RCGA or for the regional chamber, and now they're number one.
That's correct.
Interesting. So they were 49, then Jason Hall came to town, and now they're number one. Plot thickens. Jason Hall, I got a break. You can stick around.
Yep.
But they say the biggest problem with these tech startups is that they don't have the educated workforce, and that the workforce needs to start preparing for the 21st century jobs.
Yep. So I think the reality is talent drives business. You talk to most business leader, talent attraction, recruitment of an educated workforce is number one, number two on their most critical needs. So we are blessed to be, an area with tremendous higher education, number two only to Boston in number of higher ed per capita. We're also being innovative, not just in the for-profit startup scene, but look at organizations like LaunchCode that I've been proud to be a partner with. We're retraining workers in new and innovative ways to get into the tech sector. And I think of leaders like LaShawna Lewis, who would tell her story. She was driving a bus, and she retrained herself through a program like LaunchCode and is now doing an incredible job at MasterCard worldwide. And so finding new ways to retrain, reskill is as critical part of our ecosystem.
Because no matter what any politician says, those jobs that are gone probably aren't coming back. And we have to train for the 21st century jobs.
That's right. I mean, you can imagine yourself going back, 80, 90 years. If you were in the business of making horse buggies, right? That's not a good business to be in. You had to retrain to learn how to make automobiles. And the same thing happens. That's the nature of our economy. And we've got to continue to skill up and retrain.
That is Jason Hall. He is with the St. Louis Regional Chamber. What's your official title over there?
Vice President of Entrepreneurship and Innovation and our General Counsel.
When we come back, lots of people are talking about Jason Hall running for mayor. We'll ask that tough question of him and others. Coming up next, it is 9:25 here, Big 550 KTRS. Let me tell you about Stewart.